AAUW Fellows and Grantees. And now I'd like to introduce our program host, Ruth Holtz from the AAUW Chicago Branch.
Thanks, Elaine. As she said, my name is Ruth Holst, and I want to welcome you to our annual program to highlight the recipients of the AAUW Fellowship and Grantee Program. I'm currently the treasurer of the Chicago branch and the finance director of AAUW Illinois, and I've decided I need to get rid of one of those jobs soon because balancing the books for two organizations is becoming challenging. I want to thank the Jane Addams Branch for agreeing to partner with us as they have for the last few years. This is the fourth year that we're doing our fellows meeting via Zoom. AAUW has just awarded more than $6 million to 285 fellows and grantees for the 2023-2024 award year. These exceptional recipients will pursue academic work and lead innovative community projects to empower women and girls. During the past two award years, 27 of the award recipients were connected to Illinois. Some of you may not realize that the idea for these fellowships originated with the Western Association of Collegiate Alumni, which was the forerunner of the Chicago branch of AAUW. In 1886, the Western ACA gave a graduate fellowship in the amount of $350 to Ida M. Street to study at the University of Michigan. AAUW has 7 types of awards, and today we'll be hearing from recipients representing two of these types. And these awardees were made during the 2022-2023 award year. International fellowships are for women pursuing full-time graduate or postdoctoral study in the United States who are not U.S. citizens or permanent residents. You will hear from 2 international fellows today. Career development grants are for women pursuing a certificate or a degree to advance their careers, change careers, or re-enter the workforce in a variety of fields, including STEM and social sciences. You will hear from 1 recipient of a career development grant today. We hope that these presentations will stimulate you to consider making a donation to AAUW to keep these programs funded. I will be introducing each of the speakers as we proceed. If you have questions or comments for the speakers, please place them in the chat feature as Elaine suggested. And then I think what we'll do is we'll hold the questions until the end of the program. Let me just check with Kate. Kate, has Aparajita joined us or not?
No.
No. All right. So one of our speakers is coming to us today from India, and she isn't logged in yet. So we're going to cross our fingers. We did a practice session on Thursday, and she came through loud and clear. So we're confident that it can work. But in the meantime, we'll start with the other 2 speakers first. And I think I'll start off with Dana. Dana Fanslow received a career development grant to pursue a master's degree in library and information sciences at the University of Illinois, Champaign, Urbana, which she completed in May of this year. She is currently working as the youth services manager at the Fox River Grove Memorial Library, and I'm not sure what city that's in, so you'll have to tell us, where she oversees staffing, collection development, and programming for library users from birth to 18 years. She is currently restructuring the library to be more inclusive for the needs of patrons who have sensory integration disorder, also known as SID, S-I-D. People with SID have atypical responses to ordinary sensory stimulation. Ms. Fanslow's work in the library has drawn the attention of her local community as well as the library community in Illinois. She recently presented a paper on serving patrons with sensory integration disorders at the annual conference of the Illinois Library Association. So Dana, did I get that right?
Yes, you did. So Fox River Grove, as someone wrote in the chat, is in the northwest suburbs. We're sort of sandwiched between like Barrington, Lake Zurich, Algonquin, so about an hour north of Chicago, an hour south of Wisconsin.
Okay, thank you.
We are a smaller town, but a much larger town.
All right, well, go ahead.
Can you guys see my screen all right?
Yes.
Perfect. So I want to thank you so much for allowing me the time to come talk to you today about one of the projects that I'm working on, which is serving patrons with sensory integration disorder. It's really important for me to make sure that the library is a place where all the voices are heard, where every demographic feels welcome and included, that the library should be a safe place for everyone. A few years back, I came to the understanding that we did not do anything for those patrons with sensory integration disorder, which then prompted me to start the dialogue about how do we best serve this demographic. So what is sensory integration disorder, or SID for short? SID is a condition where the brain has trouble receiving information from the senses. Most people assume that SIDS only affects those with a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. But as you can see from the graphic, it affects so many more, such as ADHD, learning disabilities, OCD, anxiety, depression, even the gifted. So what are some symptoms of SIDS? You can be hypersensitive, which is you're over-responsive to stimuli, hyposensitive, which means you're under-responsive to stimuli, or sensory seeking. And those that look for more sensory stimulation, these are the ones that tend to look like the behavior issues. You can have trouble with one sensory modality, a few, or even all seven. It can be mild, where it's barely noticeable, to severe, where it impacts your everyday life. They're unsure of the number of individuals affected precisely because of how many different diagnoses are affected by this, as well as how many people go undiagnosed. So how do we go about serving this demographic? For us, we decided we are going to offer these items at all of our circulation desks, and they're meant to help patrons of all abilities have a more enjoyable time at the library. They're free to use what they need, and the items have a space at the circulation desk, so there's no need to ask a staff member for them, which sometimes can be a barrier if you have to ask for help. And they're just asked to return them when they're done. So we have communication cards, and they ease the difficulty of communicating with people who have language limitations. And it helps develop better language skills, more autonomy, and positive social interaction. We offer weighted lap mats, which provide feedback to help focus and self-regulate. Noise-canceling headphones minimize distracting or stress-inducing auditory input. We have glasses for light sensitivity, and it helps reduce the types of light that might trigger or discomfort. And we have assorted fidgets that help rechannel and focus the restless energy. So I sort of want to go over a little bit what you would actually notice if you went into our youth department. We have light covers on all of our lights. They help filter out the fluorescent lighting. We have a calming corner, which is a safe space to calm down or regulate emotions. The tent gives a place with little stimulation and visual signage on how to experience, embrace, and navigate all their emotions safely. Fidgets and other supplies allow patrons to release powerful emotions in a healthy and safe manner. And then we have a hopscotch mat, which makes an entertaining sensory integration outlet. We have a light table, which is calming and engaging for sensory seekers, understanders, and avoiders as well. We provide multiple adaptive seating options so they can choose the type of seat that works best for their individual needs. Seating is really important because it helps support the children, helps them focus, and actually delineates their personal space. And then a slew of tactile and sensory objects, once again, to help them calm, focus, and rechannel that energy. So we also offer an assortment of circulating items. Since there's so many different types, it is important that we give our community access to a variety of items that would best fit their unique needs, from different types of tools, kits, to games. This is actually really important because a lot of times families are told which products would work best for them. And these items can range anywhere between a few dollars in cost to a couple hundred. And not every time do they actually work for that particular individual. So we're giving these families an opportunity to try these items out to make sure that item works for them before they make that investment. Not only do these circulate to families, but therapists and teachers check them out for their professional work as well. So now all of our programming is all-inclusive. We offer visual schedules, adaptive seating, and fidgets and sensory tools. When a patron registers for a program, we ask if there's any adaptations we can make to make this a more successful experience for them. What we've learned is when we adapt for one child, it usually benefits multiple children. We do also offer sensory-specific programming for individuals with SIDS and their family members, as well as a specific advocacy series for their caregivers that is ran by a community partner. A few modifications that are specific for these programs is that we limit enrollment. A smaller group makes it easier to customize a program to meet all their needs, as well as means fewer distractions. We manage transitions with verbal, visual, and audio cues that allow patrons to know what's about to happen. Abrupt changes can cause a breakdown. We control the environment to add predictability, which creates comfort. We also set out a specific area in the room where children can retreat from the program without leaving the room. We incorporate repetition and routine. This allows them to build skills, and routine and repetition make a program predictable, which lessens anxiety. And finally, we provide structure while being flexible and understanding, and that is incredibly key. So the programming, the tools, the kits wouldn't matter if we didn't implement training for the staff. So we used Project Enable, which is an online professional development on delivering effective inclusive library services and programs. It offers 6 learning modules with different learning formats: video, text, graphic, journaling, etc. It really takes into account the different learning styles so that every staff member can be successful. But not only did I lead the youth service staff through the training, but the entire library decided they wanted to do it as well. I want to bring your attention back to the slide of how many patrons a library might not be serving. When you look at the number, it doesn't actually represent the community, and here's why. Most libraries don't only serve the people in their town's borders, but they serve the surrounding towns as well. So my recent programming statistics shows that approximately 20% of our youth programs are participants from surrounding communities. The closest library to us that offers programming for SIDS is 20 minutes away, and it's only 4 times a year. We now offer sensory-specific programming multiple times each month. The closest library that offers kits to be checked out or tools to be used in the library is 35 minutes away. I made sure that our kits can be checked out not only by our patrons, but anyone that holds an Illinois library card. So why does it matter? I mean, this might sound small, but allowing a child, a family, anyone the opportunity to feel seen and accepted for who they are instills confidence and self-worth. It allows others to accept and learn about individuals who aren't like them. It has this ripple effect, something that starts out so small and grows outward to a much larger proportion. When a child, or anyone for that matter, feels safe and a sense of belonging, it empowers them to achieve their full potential. So I want to thank you so much for your time and your support that has allowed me the opportunity to serve this demographic, as well as really grow in my social justice work throughout the library and the community at large. Thank you.
Oh, all right. Well, thank you, Jada. That was very interesting. And I've already made a couple notes to myself about questions I'm going to want to ask you later. But I think what we'll do is we'll go on to our next speaker and then save the questions for the end. And our next speaker is Seyma Kabaoglu. I knew I wasn't going to get it right, but I'm close. Seyma is an international fellow from Turkey who is completing her Ph.D. in cultural anthropology at Northwestern University. Although she's coming to us today, I think from Champaign, Urbana. Is that right? Yeah. She holds a BA in economics and sociology from Bogazici University, and I'm sure I said that wrong, in Turkey. She has written her dissertation on the complexities surrounding doubt in the Islamic banking and finance industry in Istanbul. Centering on mid-level bankers, she investigates how doubt plays a crucial role in their daily financial transactions, legal interpretations, and performances of piety. These bankers are often find themselves at the intersection of contrasting norms, questioning the very principles they are supposed to uphold. Is the Islamic banking system genuinely Islamic? Or does it simply mimic Western debt relations? What does Islamic mean in a financial context? Can one truly engage in ethical financial transactions under financial capitalism? By focusing on these questions, she approaches doubt as a potent tool for navigating the ethical and practical challenges in the emerging ethical financial markets. Shana is also a podcast host and content developer. Shana, go ahead with your presentation.
Hi. Well, thank you so much. I'm very excited to share a part of my research with you today. With the support of AAUW, I was able to write my dissertation, which Ruth beautifully explained. And I want to concentrate a part of my research today that relates to specifically the experiences of women bankers. And I would like to talk about how their experiences inform us about the politics of visibility in the male-dominated world of money management. So new financial technologies are usually justified by profit-making and their claims for the common good. Alternative economic movements, such as green finance, religious movements like Islamic finance, or sustainable development projects, they tend to be more explicit about their conception of the common good, what it entails, and how do we get there? How do we create positive change? But anthropologists working on microfinance and development have repeatedly shown that these technologies create unintended consequences too, and they often diverge from Western notions of empowerment and care. So in this presentation, I will argue that as an unintended consequence, gender justice in the distribution of financial labor has become a central issue in the politics of well-being in Turkey. So as a background, as a background, the Islamic banking industry, the movement, emerged in the mid-20th century to generate an economic model that aimed to eradicate interest or usury. Muslim scholars saw interest as a fundamental problem that reproduces social inequalities within and across countries. But avoiding interest was a substantial undertaking, and the necessary wealth accumulation occurred after the Gulf oil boom in the 1970s. And the Gulf-based Islamic banks were formed, and they established branches all over the world, specifically targeting Muslim-majority countries. So Islamic banking made its way to Turkey through that process in the 1970s, and the first 3 banks to enter the country were based in Bahrain, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. So in doing so, industry leaders aimed to provide financial services to religious communities that avoided interest and to generate income on the profit on petrodollars in non-Western countries. So this also meant incorporating communities that explicitly rejected financialization into the global financial system. So during fieldwork, when I first entered the headquarters of an Islamic bank, in Istanbul's skyscrapers, I was ready to discover the world of global Islamic finance. Besides chasing my own doubts, what could be Islamic about banking? I was also motivated by what I considered a feminist agenda to conduct research on Muslim men and their invisible money, rather than Muslim women and their hyper-visible bodies. I was determined that I was not going to study hijab headscarves. But 7 years later, conducting years of fieldwork among Islamic bankers, I realized that studying men and money was studying hijab, or rather, I could not possibly understand the world of Islamic banking without understanding the politics of visibility. So approximately 40 years have passed since the establishment of Islamic banks. While assessing the journey of these banks, it's natural to scrutinize their principal contention, the issue of interest. Has Islamic banking managed to provide a viable alternative to economic movements, an alternative to conventional Western banking? There's a significant degree of skepticism in Turkey too. Generally, people question if interest is effectively replaced. But this does not imply that people perceive Islamic banking and conventional Western banking as the same thing. I argue that in Turkey, the hijab provides a distinct identity marker for Islamic banks that they fail to convincingly deliver through their services. So currently, there's a stark divide, a conspicuous dichotomy in Turkey's banking sector. So if you visit a conventional bank, you will not encounter any employees wearing headscarves. And conversely, when you go to an Islamic bank, it's nearly impossible to find employees who do not wear headscarves. So this distinction is not attributable to headscarves being part of the Islamic bank's professional dress code, but it emerges from Islamic banking's hiring practices, which tend to favor women who wear headscarves in public, irrespective of whether they are at work or not. So initially, I approached this segregation as a context externally imposed, predominantly resulting from the discriminatory practices of non-Islamic banks, prohibiting wearing headscarves at banks. But soon I realized that Islamic banks also heavily rely on this context. So in my interactions with women employees, the topic of headscarf is something I almost never broach directly. For many, it's fraught with trauma, which is whether it's a shared experience lived through the experiences of others or rooted in personal history. Nonetheless, headscarves constitute an integral part of daily life and significantly shapes experiences. So the topic, even if I don't broach it directly, it comes up within a few minutes of conversation. So those who are unfamiliar with the context, this subject is deeply entwined with the history of hijab ban and the military coups in Turkey. In 1980, alarmed by the growing number of women wearing headscarves in universities and public institutions, the military, acting as the custodians of Turkish secularism, implemented a ban on headscarves. This ban was part of a long and complex process that reached its peak following another coup in 1997, commonly referred to as February 28th. And this event led to hijabi women being forcibly expelled from universities and coerced into removing their headscarves. And the backlash that ensued as a result of this ban and the broader enabling context contributed to the rise of the pro-Islamist AKP, the Justice and Development Party, and Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And this political shift resulted in their election in 2002, and then re-election and re-election and re-election and re-election last May. So during fieldwork, a prominent pattern emerged when I asked my women interlocutors what led them to work in Islamic banks. They had limited option in the labor market due to wearing headscarves. Many of my interlocutors had never anticipated careers in banking, but they needed jobs. Some approached it as a stepping stone, and for many, it allowed them the financial independence necessary to lead a life on their own terms. So for instance, Feride, a woman in her 40s, was raised in a secular family and began wearing a headscarf after moving to Istanbul for college in 1990s. Her intention was to stay in academia, but she was forcibly expelled from grad school due to wearing headscarves in the aftermath of the February 28th. So after completing her education, she was reluctant to return to her hometown, fearing that her family would not accept her new lifestyle. So even though she didn't really want to, she began working at an Islamic bank. She found it to be a refuge for creativity, where she could express herself. This is the first time I'm hearing someone explain a bank as a refuge for creativity, but that's what she told me, and she gradually identified more with it. So through interviews, it became apparent that the number of job applications women submit was alarmingly low. A common sentiment I encountered among many, including those who are graduating from the top programs, was a resigned, they won't hire us anyway. Given that the Islamic banks only constitute 5% of the industry, this exclusion from the majority of the sector is a significant disadvantage. An exception to this trend was Süreyya. Despite being fully aware of the discrimination she would likely face, she was compelled to witness it firsthand. She said, "I'm gonna try." So initially, she began applying for jobs via a popular Turkish job website, but received no callbacks. To experiment, she removed her profile picture, which led her to receive multiple interviews. So one such invitation was from a conventional bank, a non-Islamic bank. She recalls the moment when she walked into the bank. Everyone appeared as though they've seen a ghost, and the HR representative during the interview made condescending remarks such as, "Well, you come here looking like this, what do you expect?" And in response to this brazen attitude, she said like she wouldn't work there even if they wanted to, and eventually leaves the interview. And she told me about other job offers that she could not stomach, where she was offered more than double her salary, but she would need to hide from the customers and work in the back office. But eventually she received offers from the Turkish branches of international consulting firms. Yet she still chose her work at an Islamic bank over others. And I asked her why, and she told me, "The first time I encountered a man who didn't try to shake my hand in an interview was Ahmet Bey, the HR representative. It was a very precious moment for me. I almost cried from happiness. After dealing with HR people who asked me why I was wearing a headscarf and I was such a smart girl, that interview became invaluable to me. It wasn't actually not so much what he said to me, but how he treated me. That was important, and it created a bond between us." So for employees like Süreyya, Islamic banking transcends the question of whether a contract adheres to certain legal principles. It becomes a matter of dignity. Islamic banks offered her that space. Yet she also found herself grappling with dissatisfaction due to wage disparities and the glass ceiling that limited women's upward mobility within the institution. So it's common knowledge that Feride, Süreyya, and many others are somewhat confined to Islamic banks due to lack of alternative options. This reality is not lost on the banks themselves, which, aware of their relative monopoly, set salaries accordingly, often to the detriment of the employees. So as a consequence, hijabi women often found themselves paying an inclusion tax, wherein they settled for lower salaries and benefits. So while on the one hand, Islamic banks provide employment opportunities for women who wear headscarves, on the other hand, this disadvantage turns these workers into source of cheap skilled labor. So this dual dynamics simultaneously enables employment, but perpetuates an exploitative labor market condition. For example, I've compiled a graph illustrating the gendered distribution of labor within Islamic banks at various job levels. The trend is stark, so the purple one here, as the positions rise in rank, the representation of women sharply decreases. So against this background, I would like to revisit an issue that I brought up earlier, the criticism directed at Islamic banks for almost exclusively hiring women with headscarves. One such bank justifies this policy as an affirmative action, creating opportunities for marginalized women. Yet following numerous conversations with the middle and upper management, it became clear to me that this policy was not agreed upon internally. Instead, it appears to be imposed by the bank's shareholders based in the Gulf area. So a significant fallout of this supposed affirmative action is not only the discrimination against non-hijabi women, the women who don't wear headscarves, but also there is an underlying stability assumption that creates a precarious employment situation for hijabi employees. Should they decide to remove their headscarf, they would lose their jobs. I am personally aware of 2 such instances where my interlocutors had to find new jobs before they could remove their headscarf. So this environment unintentionally pushed gender justice to the forefront of the debates in Islamic finance. The employment patterns in the Turkish banking sector starkly illuminate the intertwined relationship between capital and gender discrimination. Regrettably, the politics of hijab in Turkey are deeply rooted in inequality perpetuated by multiple male gazes that enforce their own vision of women's well-being. On the one side is the Turkish military, which implemented the hijab ban under the banner of empowering women of the Republic, making them appear more modern for the nation. On the other side are religious Muslim men who capitalized on the backlash against this ban, proclaimed to champion the well-being of hijabi women, yet they continue to uphold male leadership and authority, positioning themselves as the decision makers over women's bodies. So both of these approaches ultimately serve to limit women's autonomy and reinforce systemic inequalities. All in all, for my interlocutors, evading interest is not only a technical question that you can engineer based on math or law, but it's also about the people who are going to execute these transactions. So it inevitably raises the questions of identity, performance, and justice. So thank you so much for listening, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Well, thank you so much, Seyma. I just, you bring up a situation that most of us probably haven't thought about, the difference between the people who promote wearing a hijab and the ones who don't, and the conflicts that women in Turkey have to put up with because you have these 2 opposing situations around you. Can I assume that our 3rd speaker has not joined us yet? Does anyone know? Kate or Elaine?
She's not entered.
She's not entered yet. We did resend her the Zoom link, so we're hoping that it wasn't a matter of not having the link. So I think at this point, we will entertain questions from the audience. I'd like to start out by asking Dana, what influenced you to get started working with SID? You mentioned, I mean, you seem to know a lot about it, and you've done all this work in the area. What triggered it? Was it a relative or was it your situation?
So it started, so I have 3 boys. My middle son was born with a major stroke, although you look at him now, you wouldn't tell, even though he has 40% brain damage. We've done a lot of stuff, but ADHD and OCD is definitely something that goes hand in hand with what he's dealing with. So that was like, I sort of understood like, okay, we buy all these things, they don't work. But I was part of our library strategic planning committee. And when you send out all these questionnaires and you're really, yes, you want to hear from the people that use the library, but I want to know more from the people that don't, why they didn't. And a lot of that actually came up is they didn't feel, their kids didn't feel included. They didn't feel welcomed. It wasn't an enjoyable service. So even though it was just, it started with me understanding it from my own personal life, but then partner with a couple OTs, so occupational therapists, counselors that deal with them, and really figuring out the best way to serve them. So how, like, what tools would be needed in the library itself? What would be a great kit idea? Things that are more expensive that only work for a part of it. How do we make all of our programming inclusive? How do we do just specific programming? So it was a lot of like dealing with talking to the experts, because I know my son, but once again, we've already looked at the spectrum, and there's a lot. I mean, it can go so many different ways. So really understanding and trying to figure out, we're still diving in with it.
Okay, well, we have a question from Loretta about how many visitors are actually taking advantage of these services. You know, it struck me while you were talking about it that, you know, growing up, I would have probably wanted to take advantage of this, and I would think all of the children in the library. And I, you know, have you had examples of adults coming and asking for the kits? So what's the usage?
Yeah, so it started out, we're like, okay, we're going to just put it out there to like the community partners that deal with it, have their customers and patrons that they use it too. And we sort of like, we're going to see how this works. And then it was just all of a sudden we have adults, because we have the kits, like the stuff at the circulation desk, at the adult desk too. And people come down, they don't even, because, you know, there are two different departments. There's the youth department and the adult. We're different floors. So if they can put it on hold and they can bring it up to them, sometimes they can come down and grab them. It is all ages. I mean, they are checked out. They are used all the time. I'm now having to wait because things get used so much, which I love. So our programming we're usually full. And that's when we started realizing we needed to add more programming in to allow multiple different times for like our sensory story times too, because we're limiting the number because we don't want a huge number. Like, we don't want the kids to get overwhelmed. So it's wonderful. And, you know, we're starting the dialogue with other libraries around us, and they're trying to pilot programs too, which is great. So it's like just starting out and like really spreading, and like this is taking off. The question in the chat was the cost of the kits and how did the library pay for them. The cost, some of them are only like $20. Some of them go up to like $700, depending what's inside of them. I actually received a grant from Dollar General to do a startup cost for $3,000 that really helped me like start funding this. And then I got the board's buy-in. We have a really great board that to be all inclusive for this upcoming fiscal year, so I can keep replacing and adding new kits and items in too, depending on, because sometimes the families will be like, this is what we were told we need to buy, but it's really expensive, so we'll end up buying that. Cary Public Library has just started doing sensory story times, and they've been talking to me possibly about doing kits too. So they were at my presentation at ILA, and they were talking about different things too. They do sensory story time right now once a quarter, I believe. They have somebody else come in to do it. They have like an occupational therapist come in. Yeah.
I would think that after you did that presentation for the Illinois Library Association, you're going to get a lot of requests.
Yeah, and it's wonderful. I love it. I love it. It's all about sharing the wealth and sharing the information, and like telling everyone which like partners that like decided they were going to help fund it. I gave everyone the application to Dollar General, like, because their literacy funds, be like, hey, this is a great opportunity. So the more people, libraries that do it, the more we can reach. That's my.
Okay. Other questions? I have a question for Seyma. How did you get interested in looking at the Islamic financial system? I mean, you were studying anthropology, right?
I was studying economics in undergrad.
Oh, both?
Yes.
Oh, economics and sociology. Okay.
Yeah, I started as an economics major. I am a religious person, so it was like a natural interest. And I started taking economic anthropology courses and decided that's what I wanted to do. And then a professor of mine suggested me, there was a lot of investment from the government at the time to create state-run Islamic banks. So we were at the emergence of that. So he suggested me to look into that, and that's how I started.
And how are you going to use this moving forward, do you think? Are you going to continue your research? What are the next steps for you? You're not finished with your PhD yet.
Yeah, not yet. So ideally, I would like to be in a position where I can still bring anthropological insights into the industry. So I want to be both in academia still, whether it's a full-time or a part-time thing. That could be like in an anthropology department or an Islamic economics department, and then be involved still in the industry I'm not sure about how that's going to work out, but I still want to be in touch with the industry. And then as you said, I do have like public scholarship initiatives too, like with the podcast. And that's also like a third thing. I want to like bring these like three things together. I'm not sure how it's going to evolve yet, but I guess the flexibility is good.
You have lots of time. So
Yeah.
one of the questions I have is the Islamic banking system considered to be enough different from Western capitalism banking? I mean, is there, it sounded like there is a tension in the country between, can you really be, and what you described was banking services without charging interest. Is that what you were talking about when you were talking about interest?
Yes, so interest is prohibited in Islam. So you need to engineer ways to still make profit, but it not be interest. So one way to do it, like through profit sharing, where think about it like a venture capital model where you invest in a business and then you share the profits. So it's not a determined interest rate, but like it's a different. So the Islamic economic engineers are coming up with ways to do it. But then people also question whether what they come up with is really effective or is it really considered Islamic. So there's this tension about what is Islamic. So my whole dissertation is about doubt and how we talk about this question.
Okay, I found that fascinating. I want to, I want you to come back in 10 years and tell us what else you've learned about this.
I would love to.
Does anyone else have any questions for either of our speakers? Well, I'm sorry. Oh, go ahead, Elaine.
I was triggered by the fact that I think you said women in either type of bank are limited in their opportunities. Could you give us a little more detail about that?
Patriarchy. In terms of like hijab and headscarves, yeah, it's interesting that specifically in this sector, the divide is so clear. If it's not an Islamic bank, there's no woman with hijab, and in Islamic banks, there's almost no woman without hijab. So visibly, it's very obvious, and that creates like many disadvantages. So the Islamic banking is only 5 to 7% of the industry. So if you're wearing hijab, the 95% of the industry, you cannot apply to any jobs there. And banks know that, so they're not going to pay you as much.
Oh.
But you're still grateful to them because others won't employ you. That's one part of it. But then if they don't allow for like most women who don't wear hijab, so if you decide to remove your hijab, then you would have to find a job.
And you said part of the Islamic bank's way of organizing is they don't allow women to move up to decision-making positions. Did I understand that right?
It's not that they don't allow it, but when you look at the data, you see that it's same with the Wall Street, right? When you look at the higher CEO positions, women don't occupy that. So it's not just about Turkey, it's not just about Islamic banking, but that's the global trend that we unfortunately see everywhere. So it's a similar issue where I guess we all have to come together and advocate for more,
Mobility.
Yeah.
Ann Foley, you look like you have a question.
Well, I do.
You have to
Yeah.
unmute.
Hey, Rose, I have one in the chat.
Yeah, I think Helen was first.
Oh, Helen was first? Okay, I wasn't sure which one came up
It's
first.
in the chat.
Yes,
but
and I'm
I
having
took the
trouble.
wrong-
Are you looking, is the
I
one with
meant-
Barbara Harris's name?
I don't think so. I meant to send it to Dana. I sent it to Seyma, but
Yes,
let
I
me
have
read.
one in the chat too.
Yeah, Barbara Harris has one in the chat, but I don't see your name.
Well,
appearing in my chat.
I'm using a different computer and I'm not sure. Let me read it, what I said.
Okay,
Do libraries in minority communities have an SID program? Where does funding come from if a city library has no funds for this?
So it's sort of a new trend. Libraries are realizing that we want to serve different minorities and different neurotypical neurodiverse individuals. If the library doesn't have funding, there is a lot of grants out there. You would sort of have to do a little research on it. And I know a lot of rural libraries and small libraries have that issue. But if you do talk to your community, there's a lot of times what I've suggested to other libraries is sometimes most businesses will actually have a line item for every year in their fiscal year for giving for a community partner. And sometimes, even though it might not align the right way, it's saying like, hey, we want to do this. Can you help? And sometimes they can just be the benefactor. It gives them great PR and allows you to access the things you do. Because really, a library's funding is only property taxes, and some have higher property tax coming in than others. We're a non-for-profit. So it really is trying to use other resources. But we are seeing a trend of that it is important to serve them. I don't know if that helps.
and before we go on to your question, I see that Seyma has answered Barbara's question in the chat, but I just want to make sure, you both are satisfied with that. Barbara asked what percentage of individuals use each type of banking system, and Seyma, your answer was that people who use one also use the other. Is that right? Yeah. Barbara, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
I had a feeling that the use of both types of banking would be used by maybe the same individual.
Yeah. Okay.
It's very common, yeah.
Very common. All right. Ann Foley, what's your question?
Question for Seyma. Could you say a little bit more about why the Western style banks do not allow or don't want women to wear a hijab?
I would like to understand that too.
Okay, fair enough.
It's discrimination. It's country's history. I think it's gonna get better, but they just discriminate. So
Okay. All right, thanks.
Helen, do you have your hand up again, or is that from before?
Okay.
Helen, mute.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm having trouble with my iPad. That's a question I would like to. I just looked up. There's like it's 98% a Muslim country, right? So what is the problem with that? I mean, don't you have any idea what you could explain it to us as to why they don't want you wearing a hijab? Is it discriminated against by most of the population?
So what I explained during like the period of hijab ban at universities that started in 1980s, and it's kind of reached its peak in 1997, where women were like expelled from universities. So it's based on how the Turkish Republic was formed after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. It was like rethought as this modern nation that was Muslim, but not too religious, I guess. So I think it's about Islamophobia and the rise of the political Islam and the fear that it brought up, and the political elite and the military acting as like the custodians of like secularism, which is more of like a French kind of secularism, not American secularism. I think that's the divide that needs to be understood. So French secularism is kind of, so I think in American secularism, it's like you're free to live your religious life. But then in our version, it's like you're not supposed to have any markers of your religious identity in public. So that's impact on my life is because it's not like it's a part of my identity. I cannot just like go to university and remove it, and it's against my own religious freedom. But I think the way they interpret it is that I'm failing. Like, yeah, it's good that you don't understand why it exists, because it shouldn't, I guess.
Well, do you feel more comfortable in this country wearing it and less discriminated against?
I think here racism is more subtle and less visible, but it's there, and maybe it's deeper. But in Turkey, it's more blatant, and you experience it in your daily life. So I think both are bad, but it's in different forms.
Okay.
Barbara Harris, do you have another question?
Yes, I do. I was wondering, do the Muslim banks of Turkey just operate within Turkey, or do they operate with the other Muslim countries?
So it's a global industry, but so we have 7 Islamic banks in Turkey, and 3 of them are affiliated with another bank in the Arabian Gulf, one in Bahrain, one in Kuwait, one in Saudi Arabia. So there are so many connections with, London is another global hub of Islamic finance. Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia is another hub. So it's a connected international industry. But every country has their own vision and their own version of implementing it. And my research is about like everyday life, and how our version is a little different. Ours is not even called Islamic banking. We call it participation banking. And it is connected with the issue with hijab too. It's like in a public institution, you cannot call it Islamic. So the word Islam we don't use. Even if we know that it's an Islamic bank, it's not called an Islamic bank. So it's also the part of a bigger picture.
So a bank in Turkey could discriminate, could tell you you can't wear a hijab, but a branch of that same bank in London might have a different policy. Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think so it's not like they're gonna tell you not to do it. It's like they're not gonna hire you.
Okay.
Also, they do have like dress code, like
because you become a symbol of something that they don't want on display.
But it's so common in every industry, not just banking, but banking it's so visible. But the reason why Turkish Islamic banks, I don't know that for sure, but my understanding the banks who prohibit not wearing it, they actually don't want to have that prohibition because they know from the experiences of hijab ban, saying something like wear hijab or don't wear hijab is wrong. But there's international connections. They don't understand the Turkish context.
Oh,
So there's that pressure from outside. And
Oh.
that's why they end up with that decision. I think there's an element of positive affirmation. Like, yeah, it's like they want, because hijabi women don't have any other option. If you're not wearing hijab, you don't have to work here. So leave your space to someone else is part of it. But still, everyone would prefer if everyone stopped talking about hijab, I think everyone would be happier.
okay. Dana's asking you a question, actually. Do you feel it's getting better or worse for people accepting women wearing a hijab?
In terms of like public bans, they are being lifted. So when I was going to university, the ban on hijab at the universities were removed, so we could go there freely. But when I was in high school, it was prohibited. So it's getting better in terms of so there's the public discourse saying that hijab ban issue is resolved and we are giving people back their freedom. But still during fieldwork, I see that that's not the case. Like when you actually follow people, what their experience in the labor market is, it's like you're still not hiring people. So I think it's getting, I want to say it's getting better.
Okay. Well, that you both have presented us with fascinating stories about the work that you're doing. I certainly learned a lot today. Does anyone have one final question to ask, or are we? Oh, Barbara Harris does. All right, Barbara, what's your question?
Yes, my question is, why does it always seem that any kind of movement or law is against women doing something? I mean, we have it here, and no, they have it in Turkey. I mean, it's like, how come they never pass a law that restricts men from doing something? Does anybody have an answer for that? It's out to anybody. I just thought I had to say it.
Yeah, men are in charge. That's the history. They always say, history reflects who the winner, who won the war or whatever, and I think because we're only starting in the 20th century do we have as many women writers, for example. We aren't gonna, it's been hard to change the narrative, I think, over the centuries. And we're trying to now, and I don't know. I think we're making some progress, but I don't know.
We all need to go on strike.
All women should go on strike. I agree. I agree. We could do that. All right. Well, thanks everybody for your rapt attention, and thank you to our two wonderful speakers. I'm sorry that our third speaker never got logged in. We'll have to figure out whether or not we want to maybe go back and tape her or what we're going to do. But we really do appreciate you joining us today. We know graduate students and postgraduate people are busy. So we appreciate you taking out time to join us. And thanks everybody. I see people putting little hand waving symbols on their